how big a club should be interested.
That's a really good question.
Jose Mourinho said to me afterwards, said to me privately, he said,
only 3 will go down, and there are 4 in the mix.
He likes Scott McTominay.
I'm sure he likes Anthony Elanga as well. And when you look at this...
he's looking suicidal. Hi gang, the Joy of Football podcast returns to Martin's Kitchen this week, and we start with a new segment, The Way We Were. That is going to manoeuvre quite different ways in the coming weeks.
And we've got an international version of comparisons from Norway, from the Netherlands and from Denmark, and half from the Republic of Ireland as well.
Letter from the Gantry, Martin's weekly letter from the Gantry, is pretty much from the Emirates, Arsenal this week, going back a long way with players that you might not have heard of.
And we've got, of course, 3 of the best, and Neil makes them pay.
And my scream this week in Voice of Passion, and of course Martin's Voice of Reason, putting me in my place.
And there's time for some stoppage time as well, much to the consternation of our producers.
The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks for Xavi! Rooney! Aguero!
The Joy of Football.
Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett. And just before we start, I want to put some context into the Joy of Football this morning. Martin and I, it's a Tuesday morning that we're filming this. Martin, or recording it for those listening, Martin and I were at Chelsea West Ham last night. Martin was commentating for the Premier League worldwide feed. I was in my corporate seat watching it. And it was an exceptionally dour, awful game. It was dreadful. The football was awful. And Martin called me afterwards, and he was deeply depressed at having commentated on this game.
No, not deeply depressed. I'm deeply depressed at the lack of fervour for a London derby. I think that's what struck me the most.
West Ham supporters were in full voice until they went behind, and Chelsea were in no voice.
It was a match of its times, and the days where
Monday night,
the cut and thrust, the physicality of these London games that you and I both grew up with, and maybe many of the listeners or viewers would also remember as well. We have to accept that the world isn't like that anymore, and therefore we're looking for the football. And Chelsea got the win, and a little bit luckily. But they got a win with a bit of pressure on both teams, no consistency for either club, pretty much a new definition of dry January, really, especially for Nicholas Jackson, bless him. And it's, you have to put those into context. And I was working with Scott Minto, who you know very well, of course, played for both clubs. And, he was a great companion and read the game very well. And we had a lot of fun with it.
I hope you reminded him that he didn't win anything at West Ham, but he won the FA Cup at
No,
Chelsea.
but he finished 5th in the Premier League at West Ham, his highest, the highest point that West Ham have ever finished, and the highest he ever finished, I think, in his career.
Bastard. Right, the only point I want to make, and I want to make this strongly, is however awful it was, the joy of football. Football's about tribalism. So much of loving football was about tribalism, and I came away Chelsea in 4th place, walking on air. I mean, it was just brilliant.
And Neil's tribalism, which used to be like standing behind the goal as a kid, now it's the most expensive seats in the house.
They're not the most expensive. They're the cheapest corporate seats.
The sandwiches are of the prawn variety.
No, they're not. Absolutely not. I had ribs before the game last night. Anyway,
well, you're getting ribbed now, so let's get on with the show, eh?
Yeah, right. And we're going to start with a new feature, and this feature is going to develop in a different way as the weeks go on. It's called The Way We Were. And it's going to go on. I'm trying to get it up on my screen now, but failing. Here we go. The way it's going to develop is we're going to start looking at how some of the big clubs got relegated down the years because that's part of the joy of football for us, the pyramid. And I can
The
think
democracy of it.
Yeah, in the 70s, Manchester United and Tottenham. In the 80s, Chelsea. In the 90s, Nottingham Forest. In the 2000s, Aston Villa. Clubs who were absolutely at the top of their game and suddenly was and so we're going to have a look at some of them. But today, on The Way We Were, we're going to go back just a couple of weeks, a month, when we did the Christmas issue, the Christmas podcast, and we look back on the games of 1963 and these remarkable scores.
The Boxing Day games, yeah.
And how they changed a couple of days later when the teams played the return games. And it just made no sense. How can football be like that? Well, the answer is, how can football be like that again? Because these are some of the scores. They're not the same matches, but they're the same clubs. So just recently, Nottingham Forest went to Bournemouth and lost 5-0. And then 2 weeks later, or a week later, won 7-0 at home to Brighton. Brighton went to Manchester United and won 3-1. And a couple of weeks later, lost 7-0 at Nottingham Forest. Manchester City went to Ipswich and lost 6-0. And a couple of weeks later, lost 5-1 at Arsenal. And my favourite, Tottenham lost 2-1 at home to Ipswich. How many games has Ipswich won this season?
Not enough.
1 or 2. And then the following week went to Manchester City and won 4-0. How is this?
And they lost at home to Leicester as well, Tottenham as well.
Yeah.
So, well, I think it's a good thing. And the scorelines are a bit strange, and there are lots of reasons for that, Neil. I think we might come on to it a bit later. Probably the goalkeeping is not of the highest standards all the way down the 20 clubs. The goalkeepers are more exposed by policies that are risk-taking, playing from the back even when you're in a low position in the league. Teams are still doing that. And it is likely to pile unnecessary pressure. Some would say unnecessary pressure. I would say unnecessary pressure. I can't still understand that Manchester City, whose form has been patchy, although they came to Arsenal on a much better run, but in the first 2 minutes, they're playing out from the back and they're 1-0 down. I mean, why do you need to do that in the beginning of the game? Why, if it's part of your philosophy, work your way into the game, play the occasion, not just the philosophy. And that funny enough, they recovered. They could have, if Kai Havertz had been a bit more confident, it could have happened to them again in that first half. It seems stubbornness, really, but there is that kind of risk-taking, and of course it makes it good entertainment for the crowds. Everybody wants to see goals. As a commentator, we love goals. I mean, it would be stupid to say anything other than the thrill of the job is describing the goals and hopefully nailing the right goal scorer as well. So, I mean, when you look at it individually, the Brighton miscalculated the formation. It was very over-attacking. Jack Hinshelwood, who I think is a very good young player, was left in the middle of midfield on his own, it seemed, against Nottingham Forest, who have got great strength in that department, and they took all their chances. They were ruthless.
But what happened to Forest at Bournemouth? I mean, one of the best defences in the country.
Bournemouth are a good team as well, you know, and if you get on the wrong end, if you have a bad start, and Bournemouth have found players who you wouldn't expect to be high on the Premier League scoring charts. They've found a way to score goals. Most of the teams that we call the smaller teams are really defined by the fact they don't have goal scorers. But Bournemouth gave Dominic Solanke a platform last season, and he's gone on to scoring goals for Spurs. And now, even without Evan Nielsen, Kluiverts stepped up and Ouattara stepped up. And it's attacking football with a real verve, and it is joyous to watch.
Well, look, I think there are two things here that are happening. One is that everybody, and this has been a theme of the podcast this season, everyone is just attacking, and defending has gone out of trend.
Even, I mean, defending players have gone out of trend because they have to be footballers.
Yeah.
And defending in numbers has gone out of because I don't know whether there's a commercialization of the globalization of the game, that entertainment. I got into trouble with Sky, and I think rightly so, in the 2007 Cup final, Neil, which you would remember only too well because Chelsea won it. But it was terrible game to
Oh,
watch.
it wasn't that good.
And I said at one point, trying to find something into extra time, saying, well, it is about winning. There's nothing in the laws that says about entertaining. And the Sky Switchboard was flooded with calls. And I understand that because there is the entertainment factor in it. But for those who were involved in that Chelsea setup on the day, entertaining wasn't the prime concern. It was winning. And they did win. And they won by, if you like, an ugly route. Now, I'm not sure that you get away with that. Managers have lost their job because their football's not as sparkling as the owners want, as their fans want, and perhaps the players want as well.
Can I just tell you that game, of course, was against Manchester United, who had won the league that season. Chelsea hadn't won it the 2 previous seasons, so it was a grudge game. And
it was a grind of a game, though, wasn't it?
And Jose Mourinho said to me afterwards, not broadcast, but said to me privately, he said, United become just a counter-attacking team. So if you don't attack them, they don't know what to do. And my instructions to everybody was not to attack them. And on the day, Ashley Cole was coming back from an injury and Wayne Bridge played left back. And Wayne Bridge did tell me, it's broadcast, but it's out there somewhere, that Jose had said to him, if you cross the halfway line, I'm pulling you off.
Yeah.
and in those days, fullbacks were fullbacks.
And Jose was Jose. So I do get that.
It was awful.
But there is this, it's I hate to use the word, but it's such a brand, Premier League football, that it has to come all singing, all dancing, bells and whistles and all that.
It is entertaining. It is entertaining.
Richly entertaining.
And on the back of how we opened on the difference that yesterday's game between Chelsea and West Ham meant to you and to me, I'll give you another story. The great Richard Attenborough, Lord Attenborough, who was president of Chelsea FC for a long time and a huge supporter. In 1941, at wartime game, he took his then girlfriend Sheila onto the Great West Terrace, where there were just thousands of men.
I thought you were going to say to the Western Front.
She was the only woman, as far as he could tell, on the whole terrace. And then they married for the rest of their lives. But he lived for decades in Richmond, Surrey, near 5 miles, 10 miles from the ground, and in a wonderful great square called Richmond Green, where Richmond Theatre is and things like that. And he used to say that if Chelsea lost on a Saturday, when all games were probably 3 p.m. kickoffs then, he would get up on a Sunday morning.
Maybe 2 p.m. kickoffs in winter because there were no floodlights. So he's talking about
late, yeah. But he would get up on a Sunday morning and he would spend an hour walking around the green, mulling over the game. He would be miserable, and if he didn't do that, he'd be miserable all day. And that is the joy of football. Just that tribalism of.
There's no game without the pain, is there?
Yeah.
And that is, and listen, There were some joyous moments in that Chelsea West Ham game. There was 10 minutes when Cole Palmer, who we think is probably a little bit under par physically at the moment, maybe carrying an injury, where he suddenly started to express himself, and Graham Potter came with a plan that worked very well for the first
Part of the
half.
bus.
And he obviously wasn't. He's had some injuries to deal with, but he had Jared Bowen back, who had one chance and spanked it away. I mean, that was a Chelsea error, and I know you'll blame the goalkeeper as well because that's what you do. But Jared Bowen, for me, Jared Bowen for me is a top player, and he was at the forefront. And it would have been a winning plan. He was fouled in the build-up to the Chelsea equaliser, but it was a long time before the goal was scored, 20 odd seconds before, maybe a bit more. So they couldn't go back and VAR it, but it was definitely a foul. And then there were a couple of different VAR calls on the equaliser, and then the goal that Palmer initiated was it was a significant deflection that made it an own goal. And
by Wan-Bissaka, who I thought was actually West Ham's best player. Yeah. I thought he played really
He's doing very well. He's back in London. Maybe that means a lot to him.
I want to bring up one other thing on these ridiculous scores. Ridiculous in a good way for people who aren't supporters of Nottingham Forest losing 5-0 at Bournemouth or whatever. There is far more requirements from current coaches, and it is not the only philosophy to play out from the back. Another philosophy is that you've got to be capable of playing in several positions, and we are seeing this over and over again now of teams with players saying, well, "You're a good player, you can play there," and it's doing my head in.
Well, give me some examples, because I went through the weekends and I can only find Kobe Mainu, who was picked to play as a striker, or certainly as one of the front three.
Well, you commentated on one
out of position.
You commentated on one last night because Cucurella may have lined up as a left back, but spent most of the time in midfield, and in midfield he was filling the spaces that Palmer should have been filling. And all season I've heard Maresca say Palmer's got to deal with people now man-marking. Nobody's man-marked. Lewis Cook is the only player who's man-marked in Bournemouth this season. And Cucurella in midfield and Enzo Fernandez in the same area in midfield. And then when Nkunku comes on, he's in midfield as well. All filling the space that Cole Palmer's been marked by his own team, because there are so many people getting this overload in midfield.
This is a theme of Neil's, by the way, and it applies to one team and one player in particular.
No, but I mean,
I've got Archie Gray, who's not as a midfield player, playing as a centre back because of injury problems. Boubacar Kamara played centre back for Villa at Wolves, and it was difficult for him. They lost the game because Mings and Pau Torres is injured. Diego Carlos has been sold, so you have to fill people in.
Why aren't you bringing in youngsters? Why are you using players who haven't got the qualities to play in those positions?
Well, there's one injury. Archie Gray is a youngster, and he is a fantastic talent, and he's learning to be an even better player when he goes back into midfield from what he's had to go through this season as a makeshift defender. But I thought everybody else has been, of course, during the games people move around in different areas, and that's what Cucurella did. Cucurella nearly scored a couple of times, so if he scores and you win 2-1, you're going to complain about. But he did score the other game when he beat Wolves. Did he score in the Wolves game?
Wolves. Yeah. So beat Wolves almost. It is not the way forward. I will be coming back to this in this podcast. It is not the way forward to play. There is nothing wrong with being a specialist, but specialists are not on trend at the moment with Premier League coaches.
No, with Enzo Maresca, that's all you say. I say I've been through every lineup at the weekend.
Well, I mean,
everyone was playing where you think they might play.
Well, yeah, but a lot of people are playing centre forward these days who aren't centre forwards. Arsenal beat Man City 5-1, but with the centre forward they might have won 7-1.
Well, that's the way they choose to play. Gabriel Jesus,
Gabriel Jesus that's what I'm saying.
Injured.
That's what I'm saying.
He's not really a centre forward either, so I get your point.
Clubs are choosing to play this way, and it's
Well, I don't think it's a trend. I just think there are specific incidents, and I say often caused by the availability of players. And if you have an injury crisis like Tottenham have had, you've had to move a lot of people around into different areas. But you get the benefit. Lucas Bergvall is looking at a really good signing because he's played far more games than he ever would if they hadn't had the injury crisis. So I think it's a Cole Palmer problem. And the fact is, he's still a very fine player. And he did the pre-match interview yesterday as well, which is a step up for him as well, yeah. So it's good.
Did he say more than 2 words?
Yes, he did.
Miracles. The Joe of Football as well is disagreeing. Right.
That's part of the...
We move on and we come to comparisons. And it's a father and son comparisons this week. So let's go straight into it. Erling Haaland and Alfie Inge Haaland.
Yeah. Well, the comparison is that they both played in the Premier League.
For Manchester City.
Yeah, and obviously Erling's a world-class striker, and Alfie was a centre-back and played for Norway. Got his move to England. Erling was born in England, which is always something that it was his choice. He could have played for England, but obviously at that stage he wasn't playing in England when he had to make that decision. So good luck to him. They are a Norwegian family, so I'm sure that's right. He's playing for his dad's nation as well. Both very, I would say, very assured, confident. And Alfie did pretty well as a Premier League player in not particularly successful circumstances for the club. But obviously learnt enough about the game. He's clearly part of the management team of his son, who's just got the most amazing contract for the best part of a decade ahead. So
I mean, it's forgotten now that Erland growing up, his agent was Raiola, Miko Raiola, who was not the most loved agent in the world. And
well, no, very few agents are loved because they do a very good job for their clients and indeed for themselves. And why shouldn't they? It's their business.
But it was an interesting move when he left Salzburg, Erland, that he went to Erling. He went,
You're thinking Erling Johnson.
No, Chelsea. Erling Haaland went to Borussia Dortmund. He could probably got more money elsewhere, but he went somewhere where he thought was best for his career and where he would play.
Well, where his dad thought was best for his career, I would suggest.
Yeah, and where he would play most games.
That's where there is obviously a fantastic bond there.
But what I'm saying is Raiola always got a bad media. Maybe sometimes he was better than people thought he was for his client.
Well, I'm sure for his clients he was, because he had a successful, sadly rather abruptly ended career, But Erling has arrived where he is. He's a phenomenon. I know it's not fashionable to give him so much credit at the moment. The header he scored against Arsenal was enormous. You can't go to Pep Guardiola and saying, why don't you play wingers and cross the ball like that, because I'll score even more goals, because that's the kind of service that he would thrive on. Although he'd be the first to tell you he's had to learn his heading skills, but he is such a presence, a physical presence. I mean, I think it was Saliba, wasn't it? He completely, I'll use an old expression, marmalised on that particular goal. So, he's a phenomenal talent. I'm really glad that he's committed to the Premier League for this time. I'm sure there are clauses in the contract that might mean it doesn't serve its full term, but if it does, goodness knows how many goals he'll end up scoring.
I first saw him in a pre-season friendly for Salzburg, playing just the second half when he was about 17. And I saw his name on the team sheet, and I said, "That must be Alfie Ings Haaland's son." So I was perfectly aware, obviously, of the dad, but in no more than name. If I think back, I can't remember him as a player at all.
Well, I first saw him score a goal, I believe, playing centre back for Norway under-21s past. I think Ian Walker was the England goalkeeper, and it was at Peterborough, I believe. I think Norway won 2-0. And that's the first. And of course, I called him Haaland, which is the way it is. But Erling has put us in our place that only in Norway is he known as Haaland. So we are not Norwegians. So it is Haaland, and it's his name that we shout out all the time. So yes, I was lucky. Maybe I came in earlier on the family tree, really. But when he came to England.
So what kind of a centre back was he?
Well, he was square-shouldered, not the tallest, not as tall as Erling, tall enough. But I remember it was the time of Norwegian football where it was pretty direct approach, and they had size was important in their selections, but pretty composed and good enough to come out of that. A lot of those Norwegian under-21 players probably wouldn't have gone on to play in the Premier League, and of course, he did have that escapade where he came off worse with Roy Keane, and that's probably what he's remembered mostly for by the wider public. But I remember him as a good player, a very approachable guy, and obviously able to pass on his talents, and have been worked upon by those who've advised Erling on the field, the coaches that he've had. I'm not sure that Alfie, after this leaving the house, of course, whether Erling would have had too much coaching from his dad, but maybe. That's an interview I'd like to do, to be honest, Erling. If you've got any time, get your dad together. He'll remember me probably more than you will. So,
Justin Kluivert and Patrick Kluivert.
I can't go without Gary Lineker's great line, hat-trick Kluivert and Patrick Kluivert. I just thought that was beautifully, his puns always resonate with me, actually. Getting a hat-trick in the Premier League. I would say that Justin has got a bit more all-round midfield, coming deeper positions.
So much smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, Patrick was a unit.
Patrick, I did he scored the winner in the Champions League final, didn't he, when he was
95.
As a very young person.
He was a teenager.
Yeah.
Came off the bench. Ajax beat the great Milan.
And it was the Kluivert name has resonated ever since, really. So, with Justin saying he scored more goals at St James's Park than Patrick did in his time when he was a Newcastle player. So he's had to work hard. He's been all around Europe. Everybody knows the stats. He's played in the top division of 6 different countries maybe in Europe. So, but he's maturing now into.
He's about 25, 26. Yeah. I honestly think he's one of the best Premier League players this season. I go as far as to say that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't disagree with you. He's found himself, I think. Great management from Bournemouth and Iraola in particular. We saw the game at Chelsea recently. He wasn't in the 11, which was a big surprise, but they picked up an injury which allowed him to come into the game.
And he changed it.
And he changed the game, yeah. That was an injury after 35 minutes or something like that, maybe even a bit earlier. So it's interesting. I don't disagree with your theory about 21 to 24, but he's come a bit later, hasn't he?
Has,
It's just the opportunity as an attacking player. You need to be in the right setup. You need to have people around you who.
He was always a winger. Now he's playing number 10.
Yeah.
By the way, my theory of 21 to 24 is the best players. Most of them reach their peak when they're 21. And stop really developing 21, 24. Of course, they get physically better and they get more experience. But the world-class players go like that from 21 to 24. And he obviously didn't, but he's suddenly gone like that from 24 to 26. I mean, it's worth saying with Patrick that he was centre forward for the Netherlands in a time when they had Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, when they had the Nottingham Forest guy,
Van Hooijdonk.
Well, Pierre Van Hooijdonk. In the 1998 World Cup, for instance. Those were the 3 centre forwards in their squad in a phenomenal team. And he was the one who played. He was the first
Being with
choice.
Neil is like being in a pub quiz because every podcast he throws a name at me and I'm supposed to remember all these things. My strike record isn't bad, but it's not 100%. I'm better on the pronunciations.
But Van Hooijdonk, the name escaped me. But what a trio of centre forwards.
Yeah.
But if you look back at that Ajax team that won the Champions League, they had Van der Sar in goal. They had Winston Bogart, who went on to Barcelona at left back. They had the Milan Dutch
Seedorf. No?
Oh yeah, Clarence Seedorf was in that team.
Yeah.
But they also had from the trio at Milan, the Gullit, Van Basten and Rijkaard. They had Frank Rijkaard as an old man coming back and playing in that team. I mean, they had an absolutely phenomenal side. And Louis van Gaal was the coach.
Yeah, that was when the talent pool, although you've told me this story that those who don't come from Amsterdam believe that they're very lucky, Ajax, that they have a cachet where people want to be part of it.
Yeah, it was Ruud Gullit who used to say that to me. Yeah, they've only got the best. They only got the best school because they got the best players. But I'm not saying Justin Kluivert is now the equal of Patrick Kluivert. But I am saying he's one of the best players in the Premier League this season, and that's a good start.
Yeah, and he almost epitomises what we talk about the Premier League, the fact that whether we say the standards have dropped a little bit like the year when Leicester won the league, but it is what it is, and it's allowing players to flourish. And there are plenty at Forest who wouldn't have had that kind of recognition earlier in their careers. And the same at other clubs that are punching above their weight as well. So it's it's amazing, really, that they're more similar than the Haalands. I put it like that.
Yeah, they
that's
although completely different build. The only thing I would say is that Patrick's career went to a lower level than world class at quite a young age, and
it's working in reverse now.
Justin's is going exactly the opposite way. Liam Delap and Rory Delap.
Well, you were just saying about centre forwards. There's a proper centre forward, Liam Delap, and Rory wasn't. Although he might have had a go at that early in his career, I don't know. But Rory was a hard-working midfield player with a long throw, which defines him. If you go anywhere and there's a long throw, people say Rory Delap. Can he throw it like Rory Delap? And he earned a career that would be a very good reason. You've got to play for the right managers. And the likes of Tony Pulis couldn't, they were playing for throw-ins, really, because Rory could throw it in and cause so much havoc. That big team, big players, tall players. But Liam he's a throwback. I mean, he's come from the stable at Manchester City where you probably expect, everybody's supposed to be a midfield player, really. And he's certainly not. He's a bully.
That's probably why he left.
Well, possibly so. But he's a bully. He just bashes centre halves about, and I think that's truly wonderful. There's a place for it in the game, and he's had success with it in a struggling team. And I'm sure you wish Ipswich well because they're a lovely club, and we've waited a long time to have them back in the Premier League again. Lots of happy memories of bygone times, Bobby Robson years, etc., etc. He's given them some hope. There is a chance that only 3 will go down, and there are 4 in the mix.
If they do go down, and he wants to stay in the Premier League because this is his first season of regular Premier League football, how big a club should be interested?
That's a really good question, because we're talking about clubs that don't have centre forwards. The big clubs, Arsenal, Man United. They don't have a centre forward like this. Spurs do to some extent. Their status as a big club's a big question. I'm sure people are going, what are you talking about? But they're the sort of clubs that you're thinking that might be in for him. They were prepared to pay 70 million for Mark Gay a couple of days ago, so they've got money that they can. He's worth a lot of money. I would say that. I think he could go into any club. The risk is he might become an option. Some of the big centre forwards have even been known in their club, in the dressing room. He's the option. He's the one you bring on. So I would hope that there's enough football in Liam, which I think there is. Because if you've been at Manchester City, you're not a lump. You're not just a lump. And like some lower division centre forwards would describe themselves as that. And so I've been really thrilled by watching him play. I think he lights up the place with his ambition and his fearsome disrespect of the opponents. I think he's great. And
I've just got to explain here that if some of you think that I'm really tedious because I bring everything back to Chelsea, you've got to understand that Martin brings everything back to centre forwards who actually aren't that good on the ground. And that's because he defines his own career as a non-league centre forward like that.
They're all the players I wish I had been, And I have to say that Liam is good, though he runs past people with the ball. He's a dribbler, almost in the kudos.
Yeah, he's a superb.
He is, and he does it with gusto.
Yeah,
and
with power.
Yeah, and it's. I can't think of another player in the league like him.
No, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. What I would say about his dad, Rory, I'm going to be tedious now. If you watch the 1970 FA Cup final replay, the goals. The winning goal is scored from an Ian Hutchinson long throw. And Chelsea, when they were then one of the great skillful teams of the league.
By the way, that was a throw.
Played for an Ian Hutchinson long throw, and the centre backs went up. And it was every single time the ball went out, in the final quarter, really, of the pitch, not even the
Ian
final
Hutchinson
third
was
of
a
the pitch.
forward, a goal scorer, and how he must have been frustrated that he couldn't throw it to himself.
I mean, and
because
he had a windmill action. It was
Yeah.
quite extraordinary. So his
Yeah.
arms went round again after
Yeah.
he delivered the ball. And nobody ever in world football equaled that throw. No one until Rory Delap. And Rory Delap has, along with Hutch, the greatest throw I've ever seen. And if I were a manager, I would play for throw-ins with Rory Delap in my team because it was phenomenal. It was undefendable at times.
No, I it's a powerful weapon.
And he wasn't a bad player at all, aside from that. I thought he was a really good Premier League player because he had that little specialist extra that turned him into something unique.
I was doing my research on Girona, which I'll be mentioning in the letter from the Gantry, and they conceded in the Champions League this season from a long throw that was headed in. So it has its place still. And Tottenham were troubled, weren't they, at Tamworth by the constant long throws. As a coach in non-league football, you're always, he's got a long throw. How are we going to deal with it? A keeper, you're going to come? Are we going to make sure we got somebody in front of the ones they're throwing it to? And the organisation was probably the greatest detail of organisation in setting up a team at a non-league level to deal with the long.
And they're so different with corners because they tend to drop from the sky rather than go in and out.
Yeah, is it that's quite obviously the more common route, but that people have got flat ones as well.
Yeah.
Which like someone whipping it in just as a cross, and so a lot of detail goes into that. I think it's a legitimate weapon, but as Neil said, I have my own peccadillo.
Right, the final comparison, Kasper Schmeichel and Peter Schmeichel.
Yeah, this is a difficult one because I think poor Kasper has felt he didn't want to be compared to his dad, really. He looks like him, his methodology in goal is very like him. And Peter was such a force of nature as a goalkeeper and as a person, and he's still around and it's lovely to see him. He follows Kasper really closely, as you would expect, father and son. But I think it's been more difficult for Kasper. There were times, I believe, in my career where it was like, don't ask if you're interviewing Kasper, don't talk about the comparisons. I may be over-exaggerating that, forgive me, the Schmeichels if I am. But I think being Peter's son, I don't think it's been too difficult for the others that we've talked about. But I think in this case, and because it's the same position, and because the consequences of not quite being Peter Schmeichel is you've let a goal in. That's the kind of comparison.
I think the other issue is that Peter Schmeichel was a giant, or is, but as a goalkeeper, was a giant. And Kasper Schmeichel is not.
No, but he's a giant personality.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic whinger. But whinging is part of
I must tell you a story.
I
got to tell you a story. Yes, Høg, a Norwegian international centre-back, who towards the end of his career came to Chelsea. And he said to me one day he said, do you know why God gave us ears that face forward? I said, no, why? And he said, so that when you play in front of Peter Schmeichel, you don't have to listen to him.
So that they're both whingers then. They're both Peter and
he said he shouted all the time.
Yeah, but that's part of it. And the quiet goalkeepers are the ones that you worry about a little bit. And
yeah, I agree. I want to say...
Kasper won the league. Let's make this absolutely
and the FA
clear.
Cup.
Yeah.
I want to say something here.
And he's in the Champions League still.
Yeah. I want to say something here. I think he's underrated because of Peter, maybe. Yeah. I think he's underrated. I think for a lot of his career, he was one of in the way that you now talk about Alisson, Edison and Martinez, and you probably add Raya to that this season. I think Schmeichel was one of the 2, 3, 4 best goalkeepers in the Premier League for a long time. But he wasn't... His problem was not so much Peter, although that, But at the beginning of his career, there were too many mistakes. And once he got into his mid-20s, I just think he became one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League. And I think for 10 years, culminating in his successful years at Leicester, I think he was right up there and was never quite given the credit.
Well, he's still going, and good luck to him. And you can understand why. I can't give you any examples here in football, but why kids who have famous dads change their surname, because it is sometimes it can be a terrible burden. And I think because Kasper didn't start very well, he was almost sort of written off as he's never going to be as good as his dad. But as you say, he's still doing it. He's got his winners' medals in less, how shall I say, maybe put an extra tariff on it. The degree of difficulty, this is no disrespect to Man United, but they were so successful. The degree of difficulty for them winning the league, all those in the Kasper Schmeichel years, compared to the degree of impossibility or near impossibility for Leicester winning it, puts it perhaps as a higher rating. I'm just throwing that out as an idea.
Yeah, right. Okay, that is comparisons. And from there, we go on to the cherished Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry.
Letter from the Gantry.
Thank you, Neil. It's been a great time for the Premier League in Europe, with 3 of the only 8 automatic qualifiers for the revamped Champions League round of 16 being English clubs, Liverpool, Arsenal and Aston Villa. I covered Arsenal's final game in that longer league section, away to Girona in Spain. It was arguably the fixture out of all the simultaneous 18 games with the least jeopardy. The home team was already eliminated. Arsenal's chances of failing to make the top 8 were rated at 0.01%. But it was still an entertaining affair. Arsenal went behind to the first goal they conceded in open play in this season's competition. The other 2 had been a penalty and from a corner. That it was scored by Arnaud Danjuma added further spice, with Danjuma being a former Spurs player. Brian Heel, actually on loan from Spurs, would also feature, but he was suspended. A former Tottenham keeper, Paulo Gazzaniga, was not fully fit, but his deputy was Pau Lopez, who spent the 2016-17 season with Arsenal's great rivals. Maybe that mini rivalry on the night kept Arsenal fully focused. Pau Lopez was beaten twice as Arsenal turned the game around before half-time and pocketed the 3 points that meant they finished 3rd in this massive Champions League table. A Jorginho penalty was followed by 17-year-old Ethan Nwaneri taking a leaf from the Bukayo Saka playbook with his first Champions League goal. And of course he followed up the Saka style again to wrap up Arsenal's following victory, the 5-1 statement against Manchester City. That game also included a first Arsenal goal for another teenager, Miles Lewis-Skelly, who was only playing because the red card shown to him at Wolves the previous weekend was rescinded. So high praise to the Arsenal Academy for the production line, but the likes of Bukayo, Ethan and Miles will be the first to admit that they could only develop to this elite level in a squad environment, and that the vast majority of those who make up those numbers do not find a pathway to the stars. There are other routes, of course. 18-year-old Aidan Heaven, who made a Gunners first team debut this season, has just been signed by Manchester United, a second Arsenal youngster to make such a move during this campaign. Further back, look at Luke Ayling. He was on just one occasion as a youngster, a not used sub for Arsenal back in 2009. But after a long EFL career, finally made it to the Premier League at the age of 29 with Leeds United. Semi Ajayi, a 4-time substitute who never got on for the Gunners, was coming up to 26 when he also reached the big time with West Bromwich Albion, and he's still at the Hawthorns. Others I've encountered on my travels never got so far. Junaid Mead made his first team debut in 2012 in a well-remembered League Cup tie at Reading, which Arsenal won 7-5 after extra time. Incidentally, the keeper playing behind Junaid, who conceded the 5, went on to become arguably the best in the world, one Emi Martinez. Junaid then started a Champions League tie against Olympiacos, but never featured again for Arsenal, nor in a later season spent with Swansea, who were also then in the Premier League. He's still playing, non-league, as he was when he turned out for Dartford a couple of years ago when I was a coach there. Jordan Winter, now of Dulwich Hamlet, was in the same Dartford team. In 2012, he was given the first team squad number at the Emirates, number 63, but that's as far as it got. Stefan O'Connor has been coaching this season at the Woking Academy. In December 2014, he came off the bench as an Arsenal substitute in the Champions League in a 4-1 win away to Galatasaray, but it was his only first-team outing. He then spent a couple of years at Newcastle United before a knee injury finished his full-time career. These are just a handful of stories, but down the years there have been dozens of ifs, buts and maybes. Arsenal fans are rightly proclaiming the youngsters who have made a splash in an excellent Champions League campaign and stood up to Manchester City as well. But in praising the very best, spare a thought for the rest.
What I love about that is the joy of football is with so many people who don't make it, that they stay in the game.
It's funny because the one I didn't mention, when I go to games to commentate for the Premier League, there's a special floor manager to deal with the overseas commentators. And there's a guy called Nick Sullivan, who's probably in his early 60s now. And he played in Arsenal's youth team in the late 1970s, in the Youth Cup. I've got it in the record books in my study behind me. And he was called Nicky then. He's definitely Nick now. And he played a bit of non-league football. He actually became a chairman of a non-league club, Tunbridge Angels in Kent, for a while. But he's still totally in love with the game. And he occasionally will whisper modestly that he understudied Bob Wilson, who was the great Arsenal goalkeeper of the double season. And it's there, and you can't take that away from him. But nowhere near a first team appearance. Those youth cups very special. If you don't make it through the over the age of 18, you want to have played in a youth cup, don't you? And they didn't win it, Arsenal, in his time, but he played for a couple of years in that, and I still see him, and I'm glad I've had the chance to mention him, because I couldn't quite fit him into that illustrious list of Champions League games and things like that that one time has played in the Champions League. Maybe they were dead rubbers, but you've played in the Champions League for Arsenal, even once. So you should take joy from that. Of course, not everybody can, but the majority, I think, when they look back, they might look back with anger and frustration, but as they get older, they look back with pride, and they should feel that.
Brilliant. Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry. And from there, we go to 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
3 of the best. He's made them pay. And that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Right. Young player.
And he keeps them waiting.
Young player, old player, player. Who's your young player this week?
Well, I've gone through Forest with a few players, but I realised I hadn't spoken about Anthony Elanga, and it's a good time to speak about him because, well, 2 things really, and the fitting of what we just talked about. He didn't quite make the grade at Manchester United. We'd have hoped to have done that, but he's come alive at Forest in the right, some of that United pressure off really, and he had 3 assists in the 7-0. He was played he's a winger really, but with an eye for goal and also flexibility to play infield, which he did from time to time as they swept Brighton aside. And it does show that, maybe the Forest are a big club with a fine tradition, won 2 European Cups after all. And so it's not that much of a step down. And of course, if you look at the league table, it's a huge step up at the moment.
Did United make a mistake?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think so. There've been so many mistakes, and I don't think it's particularly Anthony Elanga who was a mistake. They haven't quite nailed down the right decision-making process over these years, and others have come. Scott McTominay, who was almost seen as a backup player, and has gone to Italy as a real regular, sticking his chest out as he always did for Manchester United as well. He scored a few times doing that. But it's good to see that people don't look back and think, oh, well, I really wanted to play for them and now I can't anymore And we'll see what's going to happen with Marcus Rashford in that sense as well. I'm getting off the point a little bit. But
Can I just come on to? I'm going to come on to Serie A a little bit in a moment. But Scott McTominay at Napoli for Antonio Conte, who of course would have seen him play in the Premier League at closer quarters, top of Serie A at the moment. Napoli 54 points from 23 games. Inter Milan 51 from 22. Atalanta, I'm going to mention in a moment as well, 47 from 23. So Scott McTominay is doing an awful lot better than Manchester United. We have our Manchester United producer here, of course. He likes Scott McTominay.
I'm sure he likes Anthony Elanga as well. And when you look at this...
Oh, he's looking suicidal.
But these things, players hit their straps at different times in their careers, and it is sometimes you just need to be, especially as an attacking player now, and you do, and the way Forest attack, that pace on the counter, he's perfect for that. And so I've mentioned obviously Morgan Gibbs-White, Callum Hudson-Odoi, and of course many times Chris Wood. And so that's complete the quartet really with the mention for Anthony. So he's my young player of this week.
I think you've had in the past as your young player Liam Delaps, and we've just talked about him again. Chris Wood is 32? 33. If you were Nottingham Forest, would you sign Liam Delaps in the summer?
Yes.
Right. My young player is someone who's gone the other way. And I bring him up because I speak so much about my whole experience in football. Just tells me that 21 to 24 is the most crucial period of your development. In that it so often stops at 21. My young player is Rico Lewis. Now I had him at the beginning of this. I had him in summer. Rico Lewis as a young player, and I said if he doesn't play regularly this season at Manchester City, he's got to get out because he will not develop sitting on the bench. He's got to play. He started the season. He played the first game of the season in Manchester City's win at Chelsea, and I think he got man of the match on Sky. I think he did. He certainly probably would have got man of the match in my eyes on that performance. But now Kyle Walker's gone. Now they haven't got a proper right back, Manchester City. Now they're losing games with Matheus Nunes at right back, who is a disaster. He isn't playing out of position, an absolute disaster. He cannot defend. He has no defensive qualities whatsoever. He has no smell of defending. Yes, he can go into midfield and do the midfield bit, but why is Rico Lewis sitting on the bench who can defend? Why? Because maybe he's just going through a spell where he's not developing in the way that he hoped to, because it's so hard. Now, I hope he comes back and comes good again. He's played for England, for goodness sake, and he's 20. I want to bring up two players who have moved in this transfer window. Liverpool's Stefan Bajcetic. Close. Stefan Bajcetic. I mean, everyone was talking about him as being the next big thing coming out of Liverpool. And I saw him play, I saw him tear Chelsea apart. I saw him play couple of really outstanding games. But he got an injury. He went on loan this season to RB Salzburg, who of course had Klopp's former deputy
Pep Linders
in charge. And after a few games, got left out and couldn't get a game. So this
they've really struggled though, haven't they? They're over the first half of the season as a club. They've really struggled.
I think they're about fifth in the league, which in Austria takes some doing.
They had a terrible Champions League campaign.
And they got by far the biggest budget in Austria. So he has moved this January. The loan's been cut short. He's moved to Las Palmas in Spain. So I hope he does well, because he's only 20. Like Rico Lewis, and his career's just as he gets to that crucial time is taking the wrong path.
But he's got another person who is taking the right path at that sort of age, Curtis Jones, ahead of him.
22.
Yeah, and he's not even in the front three, the top three of their midfield. No. and he's the next cab off the rank when they need to make a change. But and he has played, and he plays for England. So it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, it's nice to follow the individual pathways, but you've got to look at the industry as well and what they're trying to do. And as I mentioned in the letter from the Gantry, there's some very good young players who've got nowhere. So at least Stefan he's performing at a good level, and I hope he gets game time.
Yeah, and one other youngster I want to mention who moved this January rather. He was rejected basically after a few first team games at Milan. He went to Monza, which is the club that was owned by the former late Italian president Berlusconi, after he sold Milan, and was run by the same director of football who was so influential. And he's just gone from Monza. He's obviously done well enough there. He's gone from Monza this January, aged 23, to Atalanta for 10 million euros. And we all know what happens when you go to Atalanta if you're any good, as Lookman and Lopetegui and goodness knows how many others have. And his name is none other than Daniel Maldini, son of Cesare Maldini. He was the granddad, son of Paolo Maldini, the grandson of Cesare Maldini. And I think he's got a chance, 23. He's he a bit like Justin Kluivert with Patrick Kluivert. He's a miniature version of Paolo physically. But
just as to cut across you, Neil, I went to see Southampton play in Newcastle a couple of weekends ago, and I bumped into Archie Gray's granddad, Frank, who was a former Woking manager, of course, but after being an outstanding player for Leeds United in Scotland. And really, he's made a base down in the south of England, I think. And I think he has some connection with Southampton's youth setup. So it was really nice to see him, because he's just suddenly out of the blue, and able to talk about Archie and how well he's doing. So just aside, I cut you short. I apologise.
Okay, let's go on to old player. Your old player.
Undoubtedly, a clear-cut winner, David Moyes, who was a player and played at Celtic and various clubs, Cambridge United, I think, and maybe Shrewsbury as well. He was a centre-half.
And Preston, of course.
Preston, yes, and of course where he started in management. And scored a few goals as a centre-half, although he was quite modest. I remember saying, you scored 2 against this team when you were playing, and it was did I? So it wasn't an important part of his game. But listen, we know him as a quality manager who's not always had the best of fortune in terms of how he's been treated by the clubs that he's found himself at. But he keeps going, and to go back to Everton in such an outstanding fashion. Listen, I've said in this podcast how much I admired Sean Dyche for keeping Everton afloat. And it didn't look like much more of a continuation of that for David. But he's gone in and obviously
scoring goals.
Yeah,
Which
they scored.
West Ham must look at it and wonder how.
Yes, they. I mean, the Leicester game off that sensational start, but for Beto, who hardly scored a goal under previous managers, to suddenly look like a proper Premier League centre forward. He knows that the job's not done yet. He's not in any way going to be over exuberant about it. But those of us who know him, and I sat, we went to a charity dinner, not knowing we'd be on the same table as each other back in the autumn. He's really good company.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because he, in the youth team set up at Celtic, he was in the same team as Pat Nevin, who's, if you like, your thinking man's footballer. And Pat absolutely adores him and said many a time that he's sort of one of the people that he got closest to in football in that period.
I think as he's got older, of course, he was very energetic. The managers go through phases. The young Mourinho we've talked about, bouncing around down the touchline, sliding on his knees in his best suit and things like that. And then you see that go, and it becomes a different approach. And David's been through some different phases. He was when he first went to Everton, he drove them forward. And now he's inherited maybe a different kind of situation, which he has all the tools to deal with. And But even he would have thought, well, if I'm going to get 9 points out of 9, so yeah, it'd be nice to get that, but I'll settle for 6. You know. So, but he's got it, and he's done it in a way that's. I've got a very good friend who's an Everton season ticket holder, and he's been almost refusing to message about the season as it's gone, and then goes off and watches other teams when Everton aren't playing. But now he's singing the blues again in the right possible way.
And they're suddenly 8 points off the relegation zone, and dare I say it, 1 point behind Tottenham and 3 points behind Manchester United.
And everybody feels that they will give Liverpool a better game in this rearranged game that's going to happen in the midweek after this, and then that could have a real bearing. Obviously, an Everton pulling further away from the relegation zone, but at the top
I don't think he's got a very good record against Liverpool.
No.
But
it is at Goodison, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the last one at Goodison, which will have all that emotive feel to it. So it'll be a real watch, that one.
My old player is Simone Inzaghi, who was a bit of a Lazio legend. Who went on to manage Lazio, and against all the odds, Italy's a funny country. It's one of those. To be fair, until really the 1990s, London wasn't well represented in the old First Division at all. Tottenham was the first club to win the League and Cup double in the 20th century, but they only won the league twice in the 20th century. Arsenal followed and won it in 1971, but then didn't win it again until 1989. No one else won it. It was the Liverpools and the Manchester Uniteds and the Derbys and the Nottingham Forests and the Leeds. It was a northern game. But in the same way, Lazio and Roma never, ever win the league. I think they've both won it 3 times in their entire history. They never win the league.
Sven-Göran Eriksson won it for Lazio, didn't he, when he was coach at Lazio?
In a spell when they had some kind of ridiculous funder who was giving them loads of money. And Capello won it for Roma one year in the same era when they got loads of money. So he did really well to get Lazio into the Champions League on 2 or 3 consecutive occasions, Inzaghi, when he became their manager. Everyone was thinking that his brother, who was a better goal scorer and a better footballer, and was the Italy centre forward and played for Milan and I think Juventus, Pip Inzaghi, would be the better manager. But Simone has turned out to be the better manager. But when they didn't get in the Champions League one season, they fired him, even though they're a crap club. Sorry, Lazio, you're a crap club with fascist supporters. I don't like you. And
didn't
like
Abramovich
like
ever fire a manager that was in the Champions League? Did he not ever do that?
Oh God, all the time. But
what sort of club then are you going to describe Chelsea as?
He funded the manager. This Inzaghi got them there without being well funded. And so when Inter Milan won the league under Conte and then immediately lost Conte because they had to sell 2 or 3 players because the ownership had fallen out of the club, they brought in Simone Inzaghi, who had just been ditched by Lazio. And what a job he's done. What a job he has done. And he's won the league for them. He's got to the Champions League final. They're regularly doing well in Europe. And I think he is someone that the giant clubs will now look at. I do. I think the giant funded clubs, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas, the big English clubs, Paris, all of them should be looking at him. I think he's that good. And I just want to, the Inzaghis, the brothers, were old-fashioned footballers. They were goal scorers, weren't they? They weren't really good centre forwards.
Yeah,
they were
Filippo
goal
got
scorers.
the 2 goals to beat Liverpool, didn't he, in the 2007
Champions League final
in Athens.
Yeah. And I saw Chelsea play against Lazio a couple of times so 4 games in the Champions League, and I saw quite a lot of him, and he was a dangerous penalty area player with that Italian movement.
Not big guys, not Liam Delaps.
No, but great
stealthy strikers
with so much emphasis put on movement, and so I would just want to give you this: they're currently second to Napoli in Serie A, and I want to give you their away record this season. Played 11, won 8, drawn 3, lost none, 11 games, scored 30, conceded 6. Conceded 6. That's probably the best defensive record away from home in the top 5 leagues in Europe. Simone Inzaghi, goal scorer who did naff all else except score goals in his career, has got this mean-spirited Italian defence.
It's long been a philosophy of mine that you look at managers, where they played, what position they played, and they will manage the opposite. So if they were a sturdy defender, the only one, this won't resonate with too many people, but Keith Birkinshaw, who had a lower division career as a sort of defensive wing half, it probably would have been a defensive midfield player and a defender, had created a lovely attacking team at Tottenham. And in the same period, Brian Clough, who was a goal scorer supreme,
and a gung-ho centre forward.
Who was very upset if somebody shot when they could have passed to him in a better position. Proper single-minded striker. Based his success at Nottingham Forest on a great goalkeeper and a proper line of defenders, and sprinkled the rest around to turn that clean sheet into a victory. So I've always felt that is the case. And he's obviously living up to the philosophy. So I think they're in comparisons next week, aren't they? The Inzaghi brothers, but they're very they're very much
thought of that.
They're very much the same. I think there's the answer to your question now.
Right, player this week.
Yeah, there's been some criticism of goalkeeping in the Premier League this season. Some of it justified, I think. So in a game that sort of got passed over because Arsenal were playing Manchester City, Liverpool won 2-0 at Bournemouth. And Alisson, who is my player of this particular podcast, made a number of significant blocks that, because it was 2-0 Liverpool, they're the leaders, and Bournemouth, they can't win every week, can they? And the game wasn't like that at all. Bournemouth could have, but for Alisson, come away with the points and rocked the smooth progress that they're sailing on seemingly towards the title. And there's all the talk about Van Dijk and his contract, and of course Van Dijk and Alisson came in together as a statement of Liverpool's best intentions and have worked out brilliant recruitment. But because Alisson's missed a few games, we've talked about Kevin Kelleher in this podcast about where he's going to go and what he should be doing with his career, because he's very good. But the old fella, he's not that old, but he's
only 31.
But he sort of looks old, doesn't he? His beard, and he talks in a very mature way, very good English, and he's a great representation for the club. I thought, God, that's the goalkeeper. He nailed down that game for Liverpool. And he didn't have to go up for a corner. I was lucky enough to commentate on his goal, which thankfully nobody marked him, because you look at those situations and you always think, the goalkeeper's gone up for a set piece, they desperately need a goal, and it never really happens. And if it does, it might go in off 3 or 4 other people, and is it the goalkeeper's goal? Who'd be wheeling away, but it was clearly Alisson's goal, bless him. It was a nice, I look back on the games that I've done, the moments that you can't control, you send to the game, and that happens, you have to describe it. I was pleased to get that one. So I thought he was great, and it was sort of almost underplayed really, because you expect that.
Well, he is only 31, and they've signed Mamadashvili,
yes,
who this season has been at Valencia, who are in the relegation zone in Spain. He had a terrific Euros.
He did.
What's going to happen next season at Liverpool in goal?
Well, I can't. Alisson's had some injuries. Players, we don't get to know really how Edison looks like somebody who's carrying not quite what he was, and he's been injured too. So you know, to get back to this elite level, I mean, it is the job. But if it goes wrong, everybody, poor goalkeeping. I thought the difference, apart from the 4 goals, there may be one really philosophical difference between Arsenal and Man City was the 2 goalkeepers. I mean, Raya made one extraordinary save at the key part of the game, and Ortega maybe have kept out the 3rd goal. I mean, it's easy to say that. The goalkeepers always have a different view of it, and if you're not a goalkeeper, I think it's probably poor to point out stuff that you don't really get to, because why would you think about goalkeeping if you want to be a centre forward, you know? But I just thought on that moment the Raya's stop was amazing, really, really amazing, and he's obviously, you know, got his A game, and Alisson had his A game. A for Alisson, A for admirable.
My player is Son Heung-min, and the reason I've gone for him is Tottenham desperately needed a win at Brentford. They got it. He supplied the corner from which the own goal was scored, and he supplied the pass from which Sarr, who I think is a really good young player, got the 2nd goal, the midfielder.
Pape Sarr it is.
Pape Sarr.
But he's been browbeaten to telling everyone it's Pape Sarr, because everyone at Tottenham calls him Pape because it's spelt that way. Yeah, but it is Pap. But I've been reassured that is the case for all the commentators.
But Son's
and for
my
Neil
player,
Barnett.
because I feel that we had David Pleat on this podcast not long ago saying he'd probably sell Son if he were Tottenham at the end of the season, because you still get good money for him, and you know, he's over 30 and everything else. I think he's not played well for 18 months under Ange Postecoglou, because I think it's, you know, we keep talking about the philosophy of coaches, and I am developing an angry, furious anti-coaches philosophy vibe, because I think that the philosophy of coaches ought to be to build a team around your best players, and I don't think it is that anymore. Now your best players have to build their activity around.
We're back on the Cole Palmer beat here.
No, we're not. No, we're not. But what we're back on is Son Heung-min, because I think since Ange has come in, isn't it funny how everyone calls him Ange, because Postecoglou's got so many syllables.
Yes.
Since Ange Postecoglou has come in,
Big Ange.
That's 2 syllables.
And by the way, you're absolutely right about Mikey Moore. He's playing. Neil said in the podcast a few weeks ago that he's never called Moore. He's always called Mikey Moore. And now he's playing more regularly in the first team. I have spotted that. I haven't done a Tottenham game. Well, one Mikey's been in the team, but I promise you, Neil, if I do, I will call him Moore just for you.
I think Mikey Moore's got...
It's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of like London lads. It's Mikey Moore, you know?
Yeah.
And we've got a Tell now at Tottenham, haven't we? Tell Venables, bless him, all those years ago was always called Tell. And now we've got one. Yeah.
But back to Son. He has been made, because of the philosophy of the manager, to basically be a touchline player. And he's not a touchline player. He's anything but. He's a player with immense pace, with a wonderful eye for goal, and with a great talent, and who roams the pitch and mullers opposition defenders when he's on his game.
Mullers, is he back as well?
Mullers, Alan Mullery, Mullers.
Tell and Mullers.
Midfield at Tottenham in the 1960s. He has been one of the greats of the Premier League. And
I agree with that.
I think that if you watched the 2nd goal at Brentford at the weekend, that Son's pass for running Sarr, it was only about a 20-yard pass, but it was so world-class weighted that Sarr could run onto it and score with a very good finish indeed.
It was a really good finish, because actually the odds were against him finishing there.
But the pass was everything that he could have wished for. And I just want to say that coaches mustn't be allowed to smother talent, and that talent, Son still has it, and I thought that was wonderful. I want to say about one other player as well. There's been a lot of criticism from Vitor Pereira, the Wolves manager, of Mateus Cunha. If I think of the best performances against Chelsea over the last 2 seasons, Cunha is right up there. What a player
Just
he
signed
is.
a massive new contract.
How did Wolves manage that? He's a fabulous player. I would think the big clubs have to be looking at him.
Well, in which case they're going to get more money because he's on this kind of money.
There's got to be a sellout clause in there somewhere, but something that he can look after. But his goal at the weekend, where he wrong-footed an Aston Villa defender, I can't remember which one it was, where he wrong-footed an Aston Villa defender.
Aston Villa, who are very short of centre-backs, as we mentioned earlier.
But it was such a brilliant piece of football, and then such a brilliant finish. And Cunha's another one. If you have the talent, at times it's going to come out. And for me, coaches have to build around that talent, not say, you've got to fit my philosophy and play on the touchline or play here or play there. Cunha, the big clubs have got to be looking at Cunha.
Well, I think it might have changed. I do think because he's, this Vitor Pereira's come in speaking Portuguese for the Brazilians and the Portuguese players. And although they've had a bit of a dip and now that's got them out of a dip, they're still one of the 4 clubs, 3 of which will go down. I would think the clause that will be in there is if we're relegated, that will change. But it was very similar to the game on Boxing Day against Man United when it was 1-0 and instead of just killing the game and winning 1-0, which is very hard to do these days, to ask Enzo Maresca, has been pleading for 1-0 wins and only had 1 all season. They broke again, and it was Cunha who broke for Hwang, who scored the goal right at the end against Manchester United, the 7th minute of added time or something. And they did it again, and Cunha, it was majestic, really majestic. But he doesn't do that much off the ball. And, what you do as a coach, you do want a contribution. Some are better at it than others, but you can't defend one light the way football's played these days. Everyone's got to do their bit. And there's nobody, no one is perfect. All the players we've talked about and given a lot of praise to today, everybody can pick holes in it. That's perhaps one of the problems with the way football is reported on. That excellence doesn't make headlines really, unless it's like winning leagues, and you've got to win a trophy to be really seen as excellent. But there's so much good football being played. There's so much joy of football in our lives at the moment, all our lives. So all you listening and watching, and drink it in.
Right, a very quick. That was 3 at the back, 3 at the back, 3 at the best. A very quick voice of passion.
Voice of passion.
Followed, of course, by the voice of reason. My voice of passion this week is a double don't turn your back. First of all, thank goodness at last we saw a referee give a penalty for holding at a corner this last weekend in the Nottingham Forest. One of their 7 goals against Brighton was for a foul at a corner, a grappling and a bringing down of a player at the near post.
Lamptey, was it?
Tariq Lamptey.
On Morgan Gibbs-White,
yeah. If you turn your back away from the ball at a set play and you then try and block a player and you're only looking at the player and not at the ball, if you block him, it's a foul. It's a foul. Just give a penalty. Stop all this nonsense going on. The 2018 World Cup stopped it with VAR, and now it's just been let to start again by the flipping referees who don't know the rules of the game and don't enact them. It's a foul. Well done, the referee of that game. It was a clear foul, but it happens at almost every damn corner. If a player is not watching the ball and is watching the player and blocks him, it's a foul.
Yeah, but how can you watch all those players?
That's what VAR's there for. No. But the referee got it right on this occasion.
You can't look at all 20 players.
No, but they're not all doing it. Not everyone.
They are. Pretty much most of them are doing it.
Well, that's how much the referees have lost control of the game. Well, just give a penalty. Well done.
Well, that has been said down the years, that
Yeah.
if they did that, it would stamp it out.
I know.
And we've
But
gone,
they did
you're
it
right.
in the 2018
No,
one.
I agree with you. They've gone backwards in the
Yeah.
appreciating.
But it's also terrible defending.
But-
It's shocking defending. Did you, in your entire career as a non-league centre forward, ever have a centre half at a set play turn his back? I bet they all wanted to take you out.
No, they didn't bother to mark me. They knew there was no threats. No, I know what you mean, but it was definitely man-for-man marking then.
It's
but
something that's
now,
developed.
Neil, the corners are all shots now, and so we've now got the total congestion inside the goal area, inside the post mostly. And people are charging in, late runs from way beyond the far post, the Arsenal way, the Chelsea way. West Ham were trying to do it last night. There's lots of reasons why it's so hard to control, and that's why they're getting away with it. And that's why on that Boxing Day, when I stayed behind to listen to Ruben Amorim's press conference, he said we're going to have to be. What he meant was darker in our approach. We need some dark arts to counteract this or to get goals for ourselves. And it's not. It's just happened now. Cunha, we talked about, he scored from a corner on Boxing Day, directly from a corner. And now everybody, James Ward-Prowse is going to be back in the fold again, having not played for Nottingham Forest. He scores directly from corners.
Can I just point out on that as well?
Son scored from a corner this season.
Yeah, can I just point out from that, which makes me so angry, is that Wolves' goal against Chelsea, for which Sanchez got an awful lot of criticism because he didn't punch the corner, tried to hold it, dropped it, and Matt Doherty put it in. Wolves were given only one shot on target in that half by Opta.
Yeah.
But the corner was going in. That's why he dropped it, because he knew he was going to go over the line.
I know.
And that's why he should have punched it. So there were two shots on target. Opta, you're rubbish. Right. I said two ways.
Opta, you're not rubbish, but you do have some defining things that some of us challenge. That's all I can say.
Don't turn your back, part 2.
Oh, yeah.
A top-class defender should never turn their back on a shot. Ever. Not ever. You take the pain. You face the ball. John Stones turned his back on Thomas Partey's goal, the goal that put them 2-1 up Arsenal after Haaland had equalised, except in Norway, where Haaland had equalised, where Haaland had equalised.
Nice one.
He turned his back and the ball went off his back and in. I swear to God that my top centre-backs, starting of course with John Terry, never ever turn their back on a shot. You stand there, you face it, and you block it.
The only mitigation, and we did discuss this before we started the podcast, is that players are so frightened of being done for handball now that sort of putting your arms down sometimes leads to just turning a shoulder away.
But in that case, put your hands in front of your goalies and just protect that. No one's going to give a handball for that. Not even those devious fascist referees are going to give a handball for protecting your goalies. Or if you want it, if you're really hard, put them behind your back, but that'd be a bit stupid.
But
they're giving away more goals than they give away penalties by doing it.
Please contact us with your observations on both Neil's thoughts about the referees and also whether you've seen any of these things happen, because I must say I do watch a fair bit of football and it's not something that I would put into a rant, but he has, and he's Neil and we love him, and it's brought us to an. I've just seen our Manchester United producer yawning over the far corner, so I do think it's probably time for you to give your final farewells.
Yeah, I would say that the reason he's yawning is that Manchester United simply don't block shots anymore. Right, we finish with stoppage time.
Stoppage time.
Now, I've made a note for stoppage time to rant on about specialists, but I've already done that, and you've already opposed it.
Well,
I believe that football
I'll give you something to rant on.
is about getting the best out of specialists.
You can't. The rant on for me is the 5 subs, because the game changes. So you're not given a full crack. Half the team is going to change. So when you go out to play in a Premier League game, apart from the odd manager, Pep is one of them, and one or two others who've not got really big squads, don't make the full 5 substitutions. But it turns a game into a different game, and then maybe the other team responds
So it becomes
into
the
another
game.
different game. And the game is being run by the coaches, not to the benefit of the players, but they're being told it's to their benefit because they will be fatigued if they play for more than 60 minutes. Oh, it's only Reece James came off in the Chelsea game. I was like, always had that. We can't risk him for the last 20. He'd just been booked. That might have had something to do with it as well. But this sort of looking after players under the guise of looking after players, making changes. One, because you might be struggling in the game, you might need to do something. 2, because you've got players moaning because they're sitting on the bench that they're not got on, and you can't handle that because there's more of them, a lot more of them than there is of you. And I do find that the myriad, when we want to analyse games, we analyse the first 60 minutes when it is the original 11 against the original 11, and then we analyse the substitutions without really analysing how the game actually develops. So
and the extraordinary thing is that international friendlies stopped using so many substitutes because it became a non-spectacle and people stopped going. And they actually stopped doing it in order to make it more commercial. But somehow the coaches got into the ears of the Premier League and the brains of the Premier League, and they increased the number.
I mentioned those guys that I know from non-league football and the ones that went up and to reach the Premier League by a different route when there were 3 subs. Now, 5 and 9 on the team sheet, those lads would have played more. They would have played more for Arsenal. They would have been in the group, as they say. And people are getting games where it's... I don't know. Do you want to have? I wish I got some facts here, and I normally deal with facts. Is the players that have played only as a sub. Andy Irving had only been a sub for West Ham. He started last night. He finally got a start, but because there were 2 midfield players injured, but he could end up only playing. Guillermo came on. Guillermo, the 18-year-old, only ever been a sub. So I'm not sure that is a career, really.
No, I know what you're saying.
Starts are starts, and we do get those facts. So it's 100th start, and I used to say, well, he's played 150 games. I'd rather say that, but actually the starts matter. Gary Neville said to me once, a very wise man, Gary Neville, he said, you're not a player till you've started 100 league games, 100 first team games, whatever league you're in. You've got to play 100 first team games to start. Then you can call yourself a footballer. I thought there was a lot of wisdom. And I didn't start 100 games in my non-league career, I don't think so.
But he will be here for another podcast in a week's
We've done
time.
45 podcasts. I don't know what that counts. So we're not 100 podcasts. We've got to make that as a target, haven't we, I suppose?
Yeah. Don't go away from Martin and me.
See ya.
As ever, thanks for listening, watching all the way through to the end. Don't forget the Patreon where you can get closer to us. Don't forget substack.com. Where you can read Martin's letters and my musings, and don't forget to like us, subscribe to us, or just write replies to us, air your own views, and don't forget to listen next week.